just smile. I mean, if you talk to people about Eric Morecambe, and I'm not actually talking about people who knew him, but knew him as a performer. If you say Eric Morecambe, they smile.
I don't think there was anybody in the whole of the British theatre who would not have given their eye teeth to work with Morecambe and Wise.
Eric Morecambe loved fame. Eric Morecambe lived off it.
You know, I hate to say show business killed him, but it probably did, in fact. But it was his life. That's what he did.
Kiss the wife. No, I was getting too excited.
When Eric was performing, the impression I always got was that he knew he was being stupid. He knew it. It's like saying, look at me now, watch what I'm going to do now. And that's when he saw the glint.
All I can say is, ladies and gentlemen, I've never become conceited. Because I feel that there is no one better. And I'd like to present to you now my... Really, I didn't expect it to be... And what do you think you're doing? Not a lot.
He was a very strong personality. And when he was on, he was always in charge.
So I smile and say, when I'm losing
And Eric made it look very easy, and he made it look very spontaneous. But it's all those years, it's all those really tough slugging around, all those kind of number 2 theatres and being rejected and bad crits and all those things, all that experience comes to the fore. So when things, you know, begin to work for you, you have the ability to take charge of that. And he had that in abundance.
Oh, yes! I liked it!
Gonna take a sentimental journey. Gonna set my heart at ease. Gonna make...
Well, he was very proud of Morecambe, proud of his roots. The family came with him sometimes, but he came a lot of times on his own, and Mike the chauffeur brought him up like, but there was something that appealed about Morecambe. I don't know what it is, you know, some aurora or anything, what you call it, just attracted him back to Morecambe.
Like a child in wild anticipation, I long to hear that all aboard. 7, that's the time we leave at 7. I'll be waiting up for heaven.
As they say, behind every great man there's a woman, like, isn't there? Well, Auntie Sadie was the one behind Eric. Uncle George, Eric's father, was laid back, but Auntie Sadie always did the pushing. And even from an early age, she wanted Eric to be in show business.
Why did I decide to roam? take this.
There again, Eric did have a love-hate relationship with it, because he used to rather say that his mum pushed him into it. But Sadie used to say, but he loved it, you couldn't stop him from entertaining, so I was only helping him with what was there.
Derek, do you think you could teach Morecambe to speak properly? What are you talking about? I speak English good.
He came on with
What everybody else does.
his partner, and my wife and I went to see him at the Winter Gardens, and he was, to put it mildly, he was absolute rubbish. He was rubbish. There were no two ways about it. I didn't go backstage because I don't think he liked to see me crying. Probably with a better script it would have been all right, but it just didn't gel. Not that I know a great deal about showbiz, I don't, but it just didn't get together.
Don't think me rude, but I should think this is the first time you've had anyone in the show who can really act.
They were a very good, solid comic act, and they did the second spot and then a main spot in the second half.
I'm always the same. Well, if you'll apologise, we'll forget it.
Well, I'd gone up to Scotland, to Edinburgh, and it was a nothing sort of showbiz job, but it was, you know, paid me some money at the end of the week, so that was quite important at that time. And I put my music down for band call, as one did on a Monday morning, and Eric and Ernie were there. And but I wasn't particularly taken with Eric at all, but he was taken with me, which is quite complimentary. And by the end of the week, he'd said, that's the girl I'm going to marry. And I used to say, oh, no, he's not, which is quite funny when I look back. But yes, we were married, actually, within the year, so it shows that when Eric's determined, he gets his own way. The writing was on the wall because, obviously, television was starting to become the thing of the future, and variety was becoming less and less popular, and more theatres were closing.
I used to work with them on their radio show in Manchester, and again they were very, very funny on the radio. So it was a question of moving that over to television, but it wasn't quite as easy as that.
Eric used to carry around in his wallet one of the original reviews for their Running Wild series, which bombed on the BBC. And the review said, is that a television I see in the corner? No, it's the box they buried Morecambe and Wise in last night. And he used to carry that, I think, as a reminder to himself not to lay down on the job, and how far they'd come and how far they had to fall.
They had a bit of a rough time for a few years because that sort of broke them, really. To my mind, it really stopped their sort of onward trounce to stardom. It was as if suddenly something had thrown a spanner in the wheel, you know what I mean? But they didn't take them long. They were soon up and going, and, well, the rest is very much history, isn't it?
We are...
They paid their dues. They worked the dumps, they worked for nothing, for pennies. They had old cars, they stayed in old digs. They had this disastrous TV series which they got over. And suddenly people were seeing the genius of Morecambe and Wise, and especially the genius of Eric.
It just sort of happened, it just flowed. It never stopped. Once they became popular and successful, it never stopped.
Singing in the rain, just singing in the rain.
They were the biggest attraction on television. They were one of ATV's absolute banker hits. As a result of the success of the TV show, they would sell out in a matter of minutes, like a pop show. If they're going to do concerts, pantomimes, summer seasons, they were just huge.
I tell you what I felt it was. They were different from any other double act, in that it was almost like they couldn't care less about you or me or the audience. They were just doing this for themselves.
One of the most talented artists in show business today. This man can do everything.
Anything.
Anything.
Television is just a face, and Eric's face was made for TV. That innocent, you could get away with the most rude innuendos with Eric because nobody believed it with that face.
Lisa, you're showing your knees, Lisa.
Hello, and for the first question, we will ask you to identify a famous building.
Oh, yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, he loved innuendo. I mean, he loved all those innuendos, and he loved all the things about, you know, the double entendre, about breasts or legs or boobs or, you know, I had it twice last night. Oh, good, you know, I hope I get it. You know, all those kind of little things. And there was, again, the cheekiness. It wasn't downgrading anybody. I mean, in this kind of age of supposed politically correctness, you know, that people would be worried about somebody talking about or implying that a woman had a beautiful pair of breasts.
Well, now, what's it?
Take your time.
Miss. I don't know how I've got myself into talking about breasts, but I mean, there was this kind of wonderful ability to convey the message very much on a clear line without saying the words. A total set of another vocabulary altogether, but the implication was, and the audience just went with the implication rather than with the words.
And for my final question, Mr. Morecambe, tell me, do you ever suffer from improper thoughts?
No. I rather enjoy them.
He took very seriously the fact that they actually were loved by the public. They weren't just liked, they were actually loved by the public, and he took that very seriously.
This is BBC Television.
Here we go. Right, okay, love.
Run TK43.
Well, it was Michael Grade who phoned me and said, "Are you interested in Morecambe and Wise?" I said, "Yes." And he said, "Only they have not come to an agreement with Lou. And we are making inquiries for an alternative source of employment." So I said to him, "Stay where you are, I'm coming up."
You'll be telling me next you've heard a voice from the other side.
I have. It was Lou Gray, but the money was no good.
Lou had them from the beginning, and I think wasn't that happy about jumping the salary to reflect their new status, because, you know, he'd paid them a growing salary from series to series, but their demands were now, they believed they were worth a great deal more, and they wanted to be paid the rate for the job.
Keep going, son.
I was about to go on holiday, I think, a couple of weeks holiday, and I met Bill in the bar at the BBC Club in the television centre, and he said, "How would you like to produce Morecambe and Wise?" I said, "Well, can a duck swim? But you'll never get them. They're with Lou Grade over at ATV." "Oh," he said, "I've got them."
And then, of course, Eric had his heart attack.
1,000 hands applaud tonight. I sing my songs, my star shines bright. I stop and smile. I take
A lot of people saw him on television, but for a greater part of the year he was appearing at places, a summer show in Blackpool or Great Yarmouth, and then touring during the year to Batley and other theatre clubs like that. So he spent a tremendous amount of time travelling, being with himself. But what happened, that was a night, in fact, that we were going to go out for dinner after the show. And about half an hour before him going on stage, he came and he was looking a bit green. He said, Bobby, I don't feel that good. I've got this pain in my arm. My fingers are tingling. I mean, I realise now, but at the time, you know, one doesn't think. So he said, do you mind if we don't have dinner tonight? We'll do it perhaps tomorrow night. I just want to get back to the hotel straight after the show. I said, not at all. I said, but don't go home if you're not feeling well. Across narrow country lanes, go through the centre of Leeds. He said, I think I will. And in fact, you know, this is one of the things when he got into Leeds, virtually just into the city, is in fact when he had this terrible heart attack.
This was the man himself, because he turned this into a routine later on. And he'd had the heart attack in the car and he couldn't drive, and he managed to get the window down. And he kind of sat there waiting for some passerby to come along, hoping that somebody would come along before he died.
I had a Jensen in those days, and I said, do you feel you could take me to a hospital? I don't feel very well. I'd like to sign myself into a hospital. A fellow called Walter Butterworth, I'll never forget it. Wasn't his real name, but I'll never forget it. And he said, yes, oh, aye. Hey, you're, Morton and White. And I said, oh, Morecambe and White, yes. So he said, oh, well, I've never driven one of these. Tell me the territorials, I've only driven a tank. So still is.
And when Eric, you know, he was telling me this, so I thought, Jesus, the man nearly died, but he has the ability to be aware of that. And even when it's happening, say, geez, there's some funny stuff here.
So he takes me to a hospital. Next thing I know, I'm being injected. This Walter Butterworth is sat with me. And I said, I'd like to say thank you very much for all your help and everything. He said, oh, that's all right. It's a pleasure. He says, my mates won't believe this. He says, and this is the exact words he used. He says, will you do us a favour? I said, what? He said, before you go, will you see me? True that.
There may be trouble ahead, but while there's moonlight and music and love and romance, let's face the music and dance.
When we arrived and I walked into this sort of small ward, and there was Eric in this sort of thing with contraptions and all the rest of it, and he saw me and he said something like, it's all right, love, don't worry, I'm not going to die.
But straight after the heart attack, when he was recuperating at home, he was allowed to take little strolls, little walks, and I used to go with him sometimes, always scared about it because he'd walk very slowly and very easy. And he became very conscious about everything around him, like he knew he had a second chance.
Well, we played it down, but in actual fact it was a massive heart attack, and it was all very much played down. But it was, I think it was a combination of a lot of things, his heart attack. You know, it went back probably to the days during the war. He was one of these, was a Bevin boy and put down the mines. And then he was moved to mines that were actually condemned. But then being in show business with that sort of nervous strain, and also being a compulsive smoker. He was a nervous smoker too. He would only smoke half a cigarette and then put it out. But nevertheless, I think they all contributed.
So he became even concerned about things like his fishing, which he adores, and you know, adored right through his life, as a child to man. But he became worried about hurting the fish and things like that, which is very unlike him. He was much more, he could be much more together than that and much harder about life and just get on with it. And then, of course, what happened is he got better, and then he got put back on the treadmill, and all that went out the window, and he went back to how he was.
Thank you very much. Keep going, you fools. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Not long nerves, you know. I heard this night about the heart attack that Eric had. And I went on stage, and at the end of the show, and I said, well, we've all had fun here tonight, but will you do something for me? If you believe in such things, will you say a prayer for Eric Morecambe tonight, because he's fighting for his life in a hospital in Yorkshire? And Eric heard about this. One of the reporters went to see him when he was making his recovery, and said, Eric, did you know that Des O'Connor went on stage at the Festival Hall at Paignton and told the entire audience to pray for you? And Eric said, well, those 6 or 7 people probably made all the difference. But that was Eric. You were never going to have the last word.
Lou Grade at ATV wanted us to move over because he had some big American shows to be done, and he wanted Dick and I on it. And we went to see him and said, we can't do it because we've got to do Morecambe and Wise. And as he said, Eric's had a heart attack, he's not going to be working for a year, and we really assumed that ourselves.
When Eric heard that Sid and Dick weren't doing any more shows for them and they'd gone to work for somebody else, he was deeply hurt, because Eric instantly had this feeling that nobody thought he would ever work again, that he was written off, that his career was finished, and he really did believe that people believed his career was over. And none of us realised that they would in fact bounce back and be bigger than ever.
Bill Cotton rang me at home, and I was quite surprised to get a call from Bill. And even more surprised, and he said, how would you like to write for Morecambe and Wise? And that was quite a surprise. And I said no. I really did. I said no. I couldn't believe that. I did say no because I didn't think it would work. I really didn't think it was going to work. He said, well, come down and meet the boys next week. It was always the boys. They were in the 40s then, but always the boys. If they were still together now, it would still be the boys. I watched mannerisms and attitude between the two. There was an attitude, and I could see that Eric and Ernie, there was affection there, but there was more than affection there. They were very close. They were like two brothers. In fact, they were closer than any two brothers I've ever met. And I watched this. I thought, there's a lot there. Get that love and that affection across to an audience, and you're halfway home. It was almost like, it's them. That's what I wanted, and I like to think I captured that.
Ladies and gentlemen, the British Broadcasting Corporation proudly presents the Morecambe and Wise Christmas Show.
Diamonds are forever. They are all I need to please me. They can steal, they can tease me. They won't leave in the night. I've no fear that they might desert me. Diamonds are forever. How old one of them then caress it, touch it, stroke it and undress it. I can see every part, nothing hides in the heart to hurt me. I don't need love, for what good will love do me? Diamonds never lie to me, but when love's gone, they luster on. stop forever. Sparkling round my finger, and like never diamonds linger. Men are mere mortals who are not worth going to your grave for.
It's funny with the Christmas show, because even during a summer holiday, Eric would be thinking of ideas for the Christmas show and suddenly think of, I know who we could have as a guest. You'd get this, you know. And particularly when it came to numbers, routines, numbers, and he'd suddenly think, we could do a great routine to such and such a musical, you know.
There may be trouble ahead, but while there's moonlight and music and love and romance,
Let's face the music and dance!
I always remember him in Portugal performing on the patio to me the sketch with Tom Jones and the yeah 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 with the girls at the back, and he'd play the song and he'd be telling me what Tom Jones would be doing, what he and Annie would be doing.
I know I've waited, know I've been blue, waited night for someone exactly like you. Why should we spend money on a show or two? No one plays those love scenes exactly like you. Exactly like you, you make me feel so bad. I wanna have a word to you. You seem to.
And he always said that I had the common touch. If I laughed, then everyone would laugh. You know what he always said. It, I think, might have been a compliment. I'm not sure, but I think he was right.
She meant me for someone exactly like you. Exactly like you.
The Christmas show was a killer.
Your sister?
My sister, yeah.
What's her name?
Doris.
Doris. Doris. Not Doris, the one with the big withers.
Yes.
People were judging the quality of their Christmas on the Morecambe and Wise show. If they didn't like the Morecambe and Wise show at Christmas, they had a bad Christmas. And this is an awful thing to have hanging over you. You know, this added to the pressure. It didn't help. But then it was again gratifying to see 28.5 million people, but the pressure was enormous.
When the show came on, everyone used to sit there and we'd all watch. It was just like a big happy family. I always remember Dad, he used to laugh so much at himself on TV. I always used to wonder, why are you laughing? Because you know what's going to happen next. But he used to sit there and just laugh his head off.
I never felt under pressure that I had to laugh. Afterwards, he would obviously, he would want reassuring that you thought it was as good as last year and that it was really good and all that kind of thing, which was easy to do because I genuinely felt that they were. And then it would sort of be a wind down.
Morning, stand up. Morning, stand up. Morning, stand up. Stand up. Morning, stand up. Morning, stand up. Get your morning, stand up.
Well, I was waiting for a phone call. I suppose it was I was about 18, 17, something like that. And I'd heard the phone ring and I'd gone upstairs and I heard the phone answered. And a couple of minutes later, Dad was at the bottom of the stairs. Gail, that was the phone. So I said, all right, I'm coming. No, they've gone. Who was it? I'm not sure. It was a fella. So I said, well, what's he gone for? Well, I answered the phone and he said, can I speak to Gail, please? And I said, I'm sorry, there's no phone here. And he said, oh, I'm terribly sorry, and hung up. And I wasn't happy. But I mean, he always did things like that in such a likeable way that you just end up going, oh, Dad. And that would be as far as you get, really.
What was hard for me as a younger person to cope with was sharing him with friends and having to share him with the public at large. It grated with me, and I know it grated with my sister a lot. I think also because he could drift into just being Eric Morecambe, the performer, when people came round, and then be just my dad and friendly and easygoing and quiet and almost not want to be disturbed. So you did tend to feel like, well, let's go into another room. He won't see us sneak into this room. I sort of tended to gear myself around avoiding him. I think that when he became Eric Morecambe, the performer, which was probably very different from his actual more relaxed character, you did feel that you were living in this kind of Twilight Morecambe and Wise world, and that you had a sort of walk on part, really.
When I was just a little girl, I asked my mother, what will I be? Will I be pretty? Will I be rich? Here's what she said to me. Que sera, sera, whatever will be, will be. The future's not ours to see.
I think that it was easier for me in a way to be closer to Dad. I think there's all the usual things of being the firstborn and the girl, and I was very extrovert and lively, and I think Gary was quieter and more introverted, and I notice now that whenever we talk about Dad, he talks a lot more about Eric Morecambe, and I talk more about Dad. Haven't really registered his professional life particularly, whereas Gary can tell you dates and where he was, partly because he's written about it, but partly because that's what he's homed in on, I think.
Gail was a nursery nurse for children in care, and I used to say to Gail, don't get me involved, Gail, because I'm too soft for this. I can't be doing with this. But of course she did get me involved, because she would bring them over, all colours, all shapes and sizes, and you'd end up with these children here to give them a treat, because she wanted to get them away from the home in London.
I can remember the adoption home where I was. I can remember it inside and out. Now I always remember going to this lovely big place, and it was always a long car journey. I'd have to sleep in the back of the car. When I got there, there was this big house and everything with a swimming pool and these lovely people there.
Eric said, it's entirely up to you, love, because at the end of the day, you're the one that's going to do all the work. And he said, as far as I'm concerned, lovely, and, you know, love to have him.
I used to have to go and say goodnight to Dad. I'd walk into the room, knock on the door first, walk into the bedroom. Dad used to be sat there, and he'd be smoking a pipe or a cigar, have a glass of whiskey or something. And I used to go over, kiss him a goodnight, get on the sofa next to him. And then he used to pass me over a little bit of whiskey over, and I used to take a little bit of a sip, quick puff on his cigar or his pipe, and then I'd get up, say thank you very much, and go to leave the room, and just as I would leave the room, he goes, don't tell your mother for whatever you do, otherwise you get me into trouble.
I think a feeling of desperation crept into finding new ideas and new material, and I'm sure that the same applied to Eddie in his quiet way up there in Liverpool, as he was most of the time. That sort of, where do you get new ideas from? How can you go on doing a series of shows as well, not just a Christmas show? How can you go on, keep on finding new material and new ideas, and even new guest stars for that matter?
What guest stars have we got on the show, Eric? I didn't actually...
None!
None?
None!
You mean nobody, no guest stars at all?
Nobody will work with us anymore, and they've all tumbled.
Well, there must be somebody needs the money.
Well, there's only one.
Who's
there's
that?
one fellow who'll work with us.
Who?
Actually, writing the shows, it wasn't unusual for me to start at, say, 8 o'clock in the morning and still be there at midnight at night. And I mean, literally almost without a break, I would eat by the typewriter, and it got ridiculous. It really it got silly. What actually happened was I was sitting in there typing, not realizing how much I was doing and what I was putting myself what I was putting myself through, I actually happened to look down in the corner of the room, and I saw this hairy thing going across the floor. Just a ball of hair. And I saw this thing. I actually saw it. I could have knelt down and touched it. It was so real. And I realised then that all wasn't as it should be. And that was about the last recollection I have before I was in bed and the doctor telling me not to do anything for another 3 months.
They have asked me to present you with a retirement present. A memento! I've always said there's no people like you people.
I don't think there's any doubt that health suffers as a result of all these pressures, as I know myself, and certainly in Eric's case, because he gave so much. I've worked with a lot of big names, famous people and performers. I've never seen any of them give as much as he did. He gave everything. Well, in the end, he really did give everything. He couldn't have given any more. And he would never relax when he was working.
Get up!
Coming home from a TV show, you know, or BBC or ITV, whichever one we're actually doing at the time. And Eric would be most insistent on getting some sort of reaction from how the show went, asking Joan and me and Gary, Gail if she was in the car. He used to spend the first half an hour, 3/4 of an hour of the journey home. It was only the last sort of 15 minutes that everybody was quiet. But he really was worried about a show after he'd done it, to get a reaction on how different people thought about it, you know.
2.
That was just some additional information thrown in completely for nothing.
Coming to 3 at 3.
It was almost as if it was happening to somebody else, because Dad was always so lively, so funny, so just Dad, that how could he possibly be ill? You know, how could he have a dodgy heart? You know, he was too lively, you know.
You'll come to me.
Giddy up!
I think Ernie had more outlets than Eric had. He was able to go sailing because he loved his boat, yeah, and that was his outlet. But I don't think Eric had any, to be quite honest. When he was working, nothing else mattered. Nothing stood in the way of the show.
Sing, just sing.
Eric had to lie in a horse trough full of water, and if it didn't work the first time, wasn't exactly right, he had to do it again. So what happened? We actually shot it 3 times. Every time was perfect. You know, the water came over him out of the window, standing on the right marks for it to come down on top of him, with Ernie dancing away and doing all his big Gene Kelly thing, you see. But when it got to the last bit, either the water splashed too high in the air, and we didn't want it to splash because we wanted to just pull the camera back and just discover him going in sedately, lying down like that.
I went through. Let me see what you've done for me. I went through. You! I went through, that's not nice. I went through, folks.
Just and dancing in the rain.
I had to be very careful because at this time it was a period when Eric wasn't feeling too well, and with a heart condition we didn't want to risk things like pneumonia and things like this. So we got him dried straight away. The time wasn't taken with them rehearsing it. They went through perfectly every time like real pros. The time was taken just changing him, drying him down so that he didn't catch a cold.
Eric was very sensible over the work. If he felt ill, he wouldn't work. And of course they did have this awful incident of the very last Christmas show that Eric worked on. and they'd got to the pre-filming stage, I think it was. Well, certainly they were doing some pre-filming, and he had a scene where he had to run at a wall with Ernie, and he hit the wall too hard. Now, everyone thought he was having a heart attack, and in fact he'd had jerked his heart out of rhythm. Then there was this big thing about, it completely undermined his confidence. Should he finish the Christmas show? So now you're torn in all directions. If you don't finish the Christmas show, you've let down so many people, you've cost everyone a lot of money, and haven't delivered the goods. And yet there was this fear of, if I go back, will I see that show through? Will I manage it? So he was I think that was probably the most difficult decision that he ever made, was on that particular show. And of course he did ultimately go back, and he did finish the show. But he wasn't keen about it.
These are glasses. You see, because it could get hurt.
They could break.
They could
yes.
break.
No, he's got a point there.
I have got a point there.
Yeah.
Well, he should take them off. He could do that.
Of course.
Yeah.
But only a few months after that, you see, he was having the checkups, and I think it was the specialist at Harefield first of all, and then it was Magdi Yacoub, who's now, you know, Professor Magdi Yacoub, said that he needed an operation, and actually it was really a matter of life or death then. If he hadn't had that operation, then he probably wouldn't have lived another week. But of course you don't realise that.
Good afternoon and a very warm welcome to Word of Sport. And on this very special Christmas Eve edition, can I start by thanking you all so very much for the Christmas cards you kindly sent to us. It's good to know that we have so many friends out there. It's also good to know that we can spend a bit of that Christmas with you. Today, although our programme is short...
Oh, excuse me. Sorry I'm late.
You've arrived?
Yes, I was on the last plane.
Eric was really quite ill, and he decided he wanted to get away and just quietly come somewhere that he could hide. And of course we accepted the responsibility in a sense. It was a bit of a responsibility, but we were delighted to have him with us anyway and help in any way we could. And he just didn't want to go to bed. He didn't want to be on his own. I mean, there were times when we would maybe drink until, I don't mean drink vast quantities of alcohol, but we'd be talking and chatting until maybe 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning. And he didn't want to go to bed. I mean, on the Friday night I was getting ready for the program on the Saturday, and I had to be at the studios at 8 o'clock. And I looked at the clock, and it was still 3 o'clock on Saturday morning when I was still talking to him. And I said to him, Eric, I said, I've got to go. I've got a 4.5 hour program to do tomorrow. And I said, I've got to get to bed. And he said, oh, it's me and the Valium and those. I said, I'm afraid it is. And but he was so worried and so concerned about it. And naturally, because the heart bypass operation then, although Mr. Yacoub did it, was in its infancy, the whole technique, I think, you know, and he was worried, very worried.
When I first met Eric with Dickie Davis, Dickie left us and we went off to the river. And there's a man who's, to me, living on his nerves. He's a bit edgy, he suddenly produces a paper bag trick where he touches an imaginary stone up. And where he got the bag from, God only knows, but he did it. And then he kept doing this, and I thought, are we going to get this guy relaxed? And so I practically got hold of him by the throat up against a tree, and I said, are you going to go fishing or not? You know. And anyway, he gave me a look at what he could do in the way of casting a fly like I'm doing now. And he cast it quite reasonably. And I thought, well, maybe we'll get this guy to relax in a minute and catch a fish. And sure enough, as luck would have it, and luck, you know, it's a funny thing with the learners very often. fish are very kind to them. And suddenly you find some sort of one-eyed fish will come and take a fly, you know, and nobody else would catch it. And so that did him a pair of good. And suddenly we got a man who started to relax a bit, to sort of let himself down.
I remember that the night before he had the surgery, I visited him at Harefield Hospital, and he said he'd actually cried the night before, and he said that's the first time in years since, like, he can remember that he actually physically cried. And I remember saying to him, well, why did you cry? And he just said, I felt so angry that I could have had so much success in my life, and that this has been here kind of like a punishment just to bring me down to earth. And then he said, well, afterwards, then I realised that, you know, I've had so much, that's why you've got to endure the things that aren't so pleasant, and you know, I feel a lot better for it.
The way he did things, he really thought about every little detail, and to do that, I'm sure he just called in on all his reserves, and that could have an effect on the heart.
We would try, but we could never sneak out of a hospital. Moreover, to be fair, he knew that, well, all these reporters were waiting out front, and he did feel a responsibility towards them. He used to say, well, the press have always got a job to do, you know, and sort of you have to give a bit. And but I have to say that in the last years he did brace himself for that. He did almost find that difficult to face, and yet you see the moment he walked out there, it was all this terribly quick, fast, off-the-top humour.
Seriously, how are you feeling? Great.
Absolutely marvellous.
What was the hospital cocoa like?
Excellent. It's marvellous stuff. It's green.
You've obviously got to take it easy for a bit, though, presumably.
Well, if I can get a bit, I'll take it easy, yes.
You know, so he just carried it off. But you'd get him into a car as quickly as possible, because they would just keep him there all morning if they had their way, you know.
Take care. Bye-bye. Good luck. Yes, intensive care unit, please. See ya. Bye-bye. See you on the box.
I said to him on one occasion when he'd had his operation, and clearly he was better, but he still was not right. And I said, why do you continue doing it? You love writing your books. You've written one book, and you're dying to write another one. And you enjoy it so much. He said, I'm not sure I've got enough. I said, enough money? I said, you've got a Rolls Royce, you've got a chauffeur, you've got a lovely home. More important, you've got a beautiful wife, Joan, and you've got the family around you. What more do you need? Yes, he said, but you know, as you get older, you need a bit of money. And I mean, he was a kind man. He was not a miserly man at all. But that was his background.
I mean, Eric he had this private little thing with him himself, you know. He'd want to go out down to the town and say he wanted to buy some tobacco or whatever. But he'd say to Joan, you know, can you give me some money? And Joan used to say, well, how much do you want? So I said, well, give me 20. 20? What do you want 20 for? Just give me, okay, there's 20. Off he goes down the town. He'd really probably only need a fiver for what he wanted. But the rest of it, he'd come back and he'd hide. So when he wanted something really bigger later on, you know, he'd got probably 150, 200 quid stashed away upstairs that he can go and just buy it without asking Joan for more money. That was a really funny thing that used to happen.
He did keep saying, he did it when he'd had a triple bypass, when I was down at Thames working down there with them. He'd say, oh, well, I'm perfectly all right now, you know, in a way, of course, he wasn't perfectly all right, really. I mean, I think when you've had a triple bypass, you shouldn't really go on and suffer the stresses of television, because I think it may be, as it proved, perhaps, you know, a bit of a chance you're taking.
You're waiting for your Christmas present, aren't you? If you want, well, I've got one for you. Yeah, special one for you. It's not a stretcher, is it?
Just wait there, I'll be back. 2 ambulance men will do. Oh, yeah.
Many people try to advise him to retire, for example, and I didn't think that was good. I thought that he should not stop, but he should modify his way of doing things, but that was impossible.
Are you all right? Dad always used to keep telling me that I was going to miss him when he'd gone. And that started really when I was quite small, and I would do these sort of roll my eyes and just, you know, oh, here we go again looks. And as I got older, it would be he'd have, I don't know, said something, done something, embarrassed me, and I'd have rolled my eyes, and his head would appear around the door, and he'll just say, you'll miss me when I'm gone, you'll miss me. I used to go, yeah. And it was quite strange the weekend before he died, because we went to a family friend's wedding.
Yeah, hello, TV's, well, it's TV on, John. That's lovely, that. Thames TV, is it?
We got into the car, and I don't know what made me say it, but I was just looking at, you know, his curls at the back of his hat, and there was something very lovable about him and very endearing about him, and I was just looking at these little curls, and I just said, I'll miss you when you've gone. And I had never said it before, and I am so glad I said it. And he just chuckled, yeah, and that was that.
It was a mixture of having an extremely calm, very pleasant, very enjoyable time, with these anxieties, with his health and discomfort, you know, a certain amount of pain, all that. But for some reason he decided that this was the time when he would sort out the photograph albums, lots of stuff which had just been in a drawer for years, and he was religiously putting all his stuff away and loving it, loving getting all his stuff together, trying to put dates on things and names on things. And his sort of shelves in his wardrobe, they could never stay in any sort of order at all, and yet for some obscure reason we found that when he died that everything was absolutely in apple pie order. He'd put everything straight, he'd done what he can with the got halfway through anyway, putting all these things into the album. He did things which were not typical of him.
All the while in this world that we live, there should be more happiness, so much joy you can give to this brand new bright tomorrow. Bring me sunshine, bring it through the years, plenty of laughter.
Stan had this theatre, and he'd hit upon this sort of idea for having someone like Eric go and just talk. So the way it was arranged, the first half was more or less a variety bill, with 2 or 3 very nice, very funny acts. And then it was followed by Eric doing what was a chat show, with Stan sitting on one side of the stage and Eric sitting on the other side of the stage. But he'd had an X-ray, and we knew that his heart was enlarged. That was what we did know, his heart was enlarged. And certainly there was no way in which he'd have gone on and done a television show. But we agonized over whether he should do this thing for Stan Stennett. And again, you had this feeling, well, Stan sold all the tickets for this show, and what happens if I don't go? The whole thing is revolving around me. And you get this terrible feeling of responsibility, you know.
And Eric had an idea that when Eric and Ernie retired as a double act, that's the sort of thing he would like to do, is go around to different theatres just to chat and have a nice little time, you know. So off we pedalled down to Tewkesbury.
Afterwards we arranged that the chef at the place was going to do a meal for all the company, so we were all going to have a party afterwards, and it was going to be our do. We were going to provide this dinner for everyone. It was going to be our little sort of treat. And a 4-poster bed, and Eric joked that, well, at last she's getting her honeymoon. A bit late, isn't it? Because we never did have a honeymoon. It's a bit late, isn't it? But we're having our honeymoon now. We've got this 4-poster bed. So it was all very jokey. The weather was atrocious.
When he came onto that stage, when I introduced him there, the place was packed. And of course, it fell apart when he came on stage. That was it. They all stood, and he came in, and he sat down with me.
It was a most memorable evening after the introductions, and he eventually came on. He was spellbinding.
And he talked about things that he hadn't spoken about in years. Some things he'd never spoken about before at all.
We talked about people we'd met, and eventually got on to Diana Dawes, who was a great friend of ours, mutual friend, who'd passed away that year. And eventually the talk got on to Tommy Cooper, who'd also that year left us. And Eric said, well, you know, if when I gotta go, I hope I don't have to. I don't want to die in front of an audience, you know. And he kept pulling things out possibly you didn't even recognize from having known him before. It's like the old gag about, you know, when you go down for the 3rd time, your past comes up, right? And you just say, I enjoyed it so much, I'm going down again. But he did talk a lot about his childhood and how he started as a comic. And it could well be that the premonition side of things was heavy and such that he felt he had to do that. And eventually, you know, we came to the end of the evening, as we thought, and up he got and took his applause. Quite long it was, and then off to Bring Me Sunshine. And we then, to pay tribute more or less to him, played the entertainer. And we started to play Alan Randall and the quintet, Colin Campbell and myself, started to play the entertainer with about, I don't know, 16 bars through, and on he came again.
And then it all went up a gear, and he started joining in with the band who had come on for the final session at that stage. And I remember thinking to myself, and in fact I think I mentioned to my wife, I hope he doesn't do too much, because he could get carried away. And unfortunately he did. He seemed to join in with playing the glockenspiel and playing on the drums, and he was just his old self, and it was so lovely to see it, but all the time I was worrying about it.
And I knew that he had to get off that stage. I could sense it, nobody else could, and I knew that he had to get off that stage.
Final bows and came out 2 or 3 times and did one of those lovely arms and legs around the curtain, and eventually just disappeared, and the audience went on clapping.
And he came off stage, he passed me and gave a big sigh and said, God, I'm glad it's over. Went to the back of the stage and that was it.
At that point I saw one of the stage staff look round the corner of the curtain. He pointed straight at me because he knew where I was, and with one big beckoning finger, I knew there was problems.
You know, I'm in the audience and a lady comes on the stage, and it's that old thing of, is there a doctor in the house? And of course there were several. And of course we all dashed round there. And I knew, I always knew that that was going to be the end. And I just went out of it. I went into another room, as they say, you know. I just couldn't take it in, and I knew somehow that he wouldn't survive that.
This theatre suddenly went as silent as it is now. And it was as if everyone suddenly became mute. And I just said, well, ladies and gentlemen, you know, the doctor's with him, and we're going to get him off to hospital. And people just got up and walked zombie-like out of the theatre. It was the strangest feeling one could ever imagine. Everybody just went very slowly, but they all went, as if they knew something, you know, dreadful was about to happen.
The ambulance was there, and they had the electric thing that they put on the heart, and they got the heart going again. And we got into this ambulance, and on the rush to get to the hospital, they had to use this electric device to keep him going. And we got there, and they were waiting for him. He was rushed into the intensive care. And for a moment I thought, he's going to make it. He's beaten it again. He's going to make it, you know. You really thought that. But he never actually really came round. He never sort of came fully conscious. But well, you feel that when you're sitting there with him, you feel that you should be quiet, that you should, when I let him rest. But then the nurse said to me, she said, talk to him. She said, you know, try and get him out of it. And so I'm saying, Eric, you see, and you feel that you're doing something wrong in sort of half shouting at him. And I said, squeeze my hand if you can hear me. Now, everyone said that Eric never heard anything, but he squeezed my hand as tight as anything. And yet he appeared to be unconscious there, lying, not with it at all, and yet he's... And I almost wish that he hadn't, you know, I almost wish that I didn't know that it was sort of the end and it was peaceful. I almost wish that he hadn't gripped my hand so hard, because then you knew that he was fighting to come out of it.
Ever since I first heard you on the air, I've been itching to meet you.
Oh, that's funny you should say that. You know, ever since I first heard you on the air, I've been itching to meet you.
There will now be a short interval while these two scratch each other. Oh, never mind him, Derek.
I sat there and ate a meal. And you go through the motions, don't you? They bring you a meal, and you actually sit, and I hadn't eaten all day, of course, but you actually sit there and eat it. You think that's the last thing in the world you'd be able to do is to eat anything. And I'm sitting there a little bit away from Eric, and then sort of going over now and again. And then suddenly the monitor, all the alarms came up on the monitor, and I was sort of grabbed and whisked out into a little ante-room. And while they worked to try and keep him going, and of course after a while the doctor came in and I said, I'm terribly sorry. He said his heart was just you know, too weak. He couldn't take any more, and he's died, and that was it.
They had a wonderful tribute at the Palladium, and we all went on, and everybody was going on doing their party pieces, but they basically were entertaining. But that night I walked on to the ground and I said, I don't know what I'm doing here. They're all saying nice things about Eric. He never said anything nice about me. He insulted me once for 15 years. And it worked good, and Joan was in the box, and the royal family, some of the royal family were there. And I just felt I wanted to find a way to say one last little personal thing to him. And I remember I was driving into the Palladium, and I came in about 6 o'clock at night, and the Christmas trees were out. And I went on that night, and as I came past the lights tonight, and it seemed to me that one of the brightest lights, if not the brightest light on a Christmas tree, has gone out. And as I said it, I felt this emotion starting to well up, as I'm feeling now, starting to well up inside of me. And then I had to go and sing this song, which I did a parody of There Will Never Be Another You. And I sang that, and I know that was difficult to get through, but he was special.
little bit of Michael died also, you know. It's hard to explain, but just certain things that Michael used to do that you don't seem to see him do it now. He doesn't seem quite, I don't know, contented with his life like he was in the days that he was chauffeuring for Eric.
In many ways, Eric was his own worst enemy because he never, ever stopped doing the jokes. He never stopped. He always had to give a performance. Even with me, he didn't stop, even when we were on our own. In fact, I said to him once, for Christ's sake, Eric, back off. It's me. You didn't have to I've heard them all. I said, 3 of them you've just done, I wrote.
Arsenal won the FA Cup in 1950 as well. Absolutely correct. And the man who scored the goal had a nasty cough. Congratulations, Mr. Memory. Thank you. Now, could you please tell me who was the English Prime Minister in England? Oh, that's clever. In 1801.
Yeah, when I'm doing my truck driving now and I get onto long stretch of motorway, you do think about him.
Down that big, deep pit, William.
You think about all the funny times and the things that make you smile. Like I can sit there now in a truck and just burst out laughing at a memory of Dad.
No! Think again. William Deep. No! William Pitt.
So yeah, we do think, well, I think of him a lot. I'm sure everyone else does.
There was an awful lot of Eric in the character, in his persona on the screen. That wasn't all there was to him. He was quite a serious man. You could have a serious conversation with him about stuff. But essentially that was a big part. That's part of who he was. You can't divorce it. He couldn't act that. He couldn't act Eric on stage. That was part of him. The naughty schoolboy, the ad-libber, the man desperate to make people laugh and so on. That was part of him.
Eric said, again, lots of words of wisdom that last few days. He said, you know, if anything happens to me, he said, you must never reproach yourself. He said, because he said, you've been a wonderful wife. He said, and I've had a wonderful life. He said, I've had a marvellous life. He said, you must never reproach yourself with anything. All these things to say to you, you know. And sort of thanked me, really, for helping make him what he was. And sort of thanked me. As I was sitting there, doing my hair and my face in the mirror, there's Eric behind me, you know, coming out with these words, as if almost a sort of sudden thought, as if, well, I've got to tell her, almost as if he knew, well, it might, if I leave it, it might be too late, you know?
You know, a bit of the nation died when he died. You know, there's just a bit that's gone. Thank goodness for videotape.
You're playing all the wrong notes.
I'm playing all the right notes, but not necessarily in the right order. I'll give you that. I'll give you that, sunshine.
Bring me sunshine in your smile. Bring me laughter all the while. In this world where we live, there should be more happiness. So much joy you can give to each brand new bright tomorrow. Make me happy through the years. Never bring me any tears. Let your arms be as warm as the sun from up above. Bring me fun, bring me sunshine, bring me love. Hey! Bring me sunshine. much joy you can give to each brand new bright tomorrow. Make me happy through the years. He's snapped. He's gone now. His wife doesn't like him doing that, you know.